The desert wind howled through the golden dunes as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a fiery glow across the lavish palace of Sheikh Khalid Al-Zahra. The night was still, but a storm was brewing, a storm of secrets, betrayal, and fate. Tonight, Khalid was set to marry, but it was not for love. The arranged marriage was a necessity, a business transaction that would secure his power and fortune. His family's empire, once unshakable, was now at the brink of collapse. The political alliances he had so carefully cultivated had begun to fray, and the threat of losing everything loomed large. His bride, Zara, was a woman shrouded in mystery, her origins a whispered rumor in the court. Zara had been handpicked for her connections, but no one knew much about her past. Some said she was from a noble family, others claimed she was a commoner with a dark secret. Whatever the truth, Zara's presence in Khalid's life was a calculated move, one that could either save or destroy him. As the grand ceremony approached, Khalid stood at the edge of his balcony, watching the guests arrive. His eyes were cold, calculating, his face a mask of indifference, but beneath the surface a storm brewed inside him. He did not want this marriage. He did not want a woman he didn't know, a woman who could be his undoing. And yet, as he gazed at the opulent surroundings, the weight of his responsibility bore down on him. His family's future rested in the hands of a woman he had never met. But what Khalid didn't know was that Zara's past was about to collide with his future in a way that would shatter everything he believed. The grand hall was alive with the clinking of silverware, the laughter of dignitaries, and the soft hum of anticipation. The night of the wedding had arrived. Guests in opulent robes mingled, their faces veiled in an air of mystery, as if they were all aware of the tension that hung in the air. Zara had arrived in the palace earlier that day, her presence so quiet it was almost as if she didn't belong. Her dark eyes, framed by long lashes, were cold and unreadable, as though she had long ago learned to hide her emotions. She was dressed in a gown of deep blue silk, the color of the night sky, with intricate gold embroidery that shimmered under the palace lights. She walked with an elegance that seemed at odds with the whispers surrounding her. Sheikh Khalid stood at the head of the room, his posture regal, yet there was something distant in his eyes. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his presence commanding attention without a single word spoken. But tonight, the woman in the room who commanded his thoughts was not his bride. Not yet. It was the situation he found himself in. A marriage of convenience, a marriage that was meant to save his empire, not his heart. As Zara entered the room, the guests fell silent. Their eyes flickered between her and the sheikh, murmuring under their breath. There was something undeniably striking about her, something unsettling. She did not meet Khalid's gaze, but he could feel her presence. His chest tightened. The moment he locked eyes with her, he felt a jolt, like a current of electricity coursing through him. Zara did not smile, did not show any sign of acknowledgement. She merely nodded once, as if this were just another arranged meeting between strangers. Khalid's gaze hardened. He was a man who prided himself on control over his empire, his wealth, his fate. Yet in this moment, he felt a flicker of unease. Zara was a woman of few words, and that in itself was dangerous. She was the kind of woman who didn't need to speak to make her presence known. And this unnerved him. "I trust you are comfortable, my lady?" Khalid's voice was cold, yet polite as he approached her. The words were courteous, but there was a sharpness in his tone, a hint of underlying frustration. Zara's eyes met his, unblinking, as if she were examining him. "I am Sheikh Khalid. Thank you for your hospitality." Her voice was soft, but it carried an edge of something he couldn't quite place. It was as though she were speaking through a veil of secrets. "Good," he replied curtly. "The marriage is set for tomorrow, and I trust you will not disappoint your family." Her lips barely moved as she responded, "I will not disappoint." The words were simple, yet there was an unsettling weight behind them. Khalid couldn't shake the feeling that Zara was hiding something that had nothing to do with the marriage, something deeper, darker. It was as though she were playing a game, but the rules were hers alone to follow. As the night wore on, Khalid found himself watching Zara from across the room. She spoke to no one, yet everyone seemed to acknowledge her presence. There was an air of mystery surrounding her, and it wasn't just her beauty. There was a sense of something ancient in the way she carried herself. A quiet power, as though she had lived many lives, each one more complicated than the last. The more he observed her, the more he realized that this marriage, this agreement, might be far more complicated than he had ever anticipated. He had chosen her for her family's connections, for her status. But there was something about her that made him question everything. What was Zara's past? What secrets did she carry with her? Why was she so determined to keep them buried? Khalid knew one thing for sure. The future he had hoped for was no longer as certain as it seemed. Zara was a force he didn't fully understand, and that made her a threat, one he had no idea how to handle. As the evening came to a close, the guests slowly began to depart, leaving the two of them alone in the grand hall. The silence between them stretched on, thick with unspoken tension. Khalid finally spoke, his voice quieter now, as if to himself. "This marriage," he began, "will not be easy." Zara glanced at him, her gaze as piercing as ever. "Nothing worth having ever is," she replied softly. Khalid's pulse quickened. There was something in her words, in the way she spoke, that made him realize just how little he truly knew about the woman who was about to become his wife. The calm facade she wore was a mask, and beneath it lay something far darker. And as he stared at her, he realized that this was not going to be the simple arrangement he had planned. Zara was a mystery, and mysteries, Khalid knew, were never what they seemed. The days following the wedding were filled with a strange tension that neither Zara nor Khalid could shake. The palace, once a place of quiet grandeur, now felt like a pressure cooker, each passing moment thick with unspoken words. They had been married in a lavish ceremony, yet the distance between them remained as though they were still strangers. Zara had settled into her new life with an air of calm, almost too perfect. She moved through the palace with grace, speaking only when necessary and always keeping a cool distance. Yet Khalid began to notice something small, almost imperceptible, in the way she moved. When no one was looking, her shoulders seemed to relax, her expression softened ever so slightly. It was as if beneath her stoic exterior, there was a woman yearning for something more than just this arranged union. Khalid had expected their life together to be a business transaction, nothing more. But over the days, he found himself thinking about Zara in ways he hadn't planned. At first, it was curiosity, a desire to understand the woman who had so easily slipped into his life, carrying with her the weight of so many secrets. But as the days passed, that curiosity grew into something more, something unsettling. One evening, after a long day of meetings with his advisors, Khalid found himself in the palace garden, his mind restless. The air was warm, the scent of jasmine filling the night. He walked along the marble path, lost in thought, when he saw Zara sitting by the fountain, staring into the water. Her posture was poised, but her eyes betrayed a sorrow that Khalid had not expected to see. For the first time since their marriage, he saw a glimpse of the woman behind the cold mask. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached her, unsure of what he would say. "Zara," he said softly, his voice carrying a hint of hesitation. She didn't look up at him immediately, as if weighing whether to acknowledge him at all. Finally, her eyes met his, and for a moment, there was something raw in her gaze. She was no longer the distant woman he had married, but a person, a woman with emotions, fears, and past scars. "What do you want, Khalid?" she asked, her voice calm but weary, as though the question had been asked 1,000 times before. His chest tightened. He had never seen her like this before. He had expected anger, indifference, or even the polite distance she had shown him since their wedding. But this was something different. This was vulnerability. "I didn't expect this," Khalid confessed, his words coming more easily than he anticipated. I thought this would be a simple arrangement, but it's not. It's not simple at all. Zara studied him carefully, her lips parting slightly as if to speak, but no words came. Khalid couldn't stop himself from continuing. I see you, Zara. I see the way you move through this palace like a shadow, always on the edge, always hiding. What are you hiding? For a long time, she didn't respond. The only sound between them was the soft trickle of the fountain, its steady rhythm oddly comforting. Khalid took a step closer, drawn by something he couldn't explain. There was something about Zara, something that called to him, something that made him want to know her more. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. You're right, I'm hiding, but it's not something I can tell you. Not yet. The weight of her words hung in the air, and Khalid felt a pang of frustration. His curiosity was gnawing at him, demanding answers, but he knew better than to press her further. Instead, he took a deep breath and softened his tone. I don't want to force you into anything, he said, but I won't stand by while you close yourself off completely. Not from me. Not from anyone. Zara's expression faltered for a moment, her carefully constructed walls cracking just enough for him to see the woman beneath. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to read him. For a brief moment, Khalid saw a flicker of something in her, a yearning, a desire to trust, perhaps even to open up. But then, like a veil dropping, it was gone. Zara stood up from the fountain, her posture once again rigid, her eyes cold. You don't understand, she said, her voice sharper now. You can never understand. Before Khalid could respond, she turned and walked away, her silhouette swallowed by the darkness of the palace gardens. Khalid remained where he stood, staring into the night. A part of him wanted to chase after her, to demand she explain herself, but he held back. Something told him that rushing her would only push her further away. But in that brief moment, he had glimpsed the woman behind the mask, and that glimpse had shaken him in a way he hadn't anticipated. Zara was not the cold, distant bride he had expected. She was far more complex, and for the first time, Khalid found himself wondering what it was that made her so guarded. And more importantly, what was she hiding? The days following that evening by the fountain were filled with an eerie quiet. Khalid and Zara maintained their roles, but an unspoken tension lingered in the air. Their conversations were short, clipped, and increasingly strained. It was clear that something was festering beneath the surface, something that neither of them could ignore forever. Khalid's thoughts constantly returned to the mysterious woman he had married. Zara's silence, her guarded demeanor, and the air of sorrow that seemed to follow her like a shadow. All of it was a puzzle, one that he was no closer to solving. But what haunted him most was the undeniable feeling that her past was far darker than anything he could have imagined. It was during an afternoon meeting with his closest advisor, Imran, that Khalid learned something that would change everything. Your Excellency, Imran began, his voice laced with concern. There are rumors, whispers that have reached my ears. They speak of your bride. Khalid froze, his pulse quickening. What rumors? Imran hesitated, his brow furrowing as if weighing the consequences of his next words. There are stories of a past life, of a woman who was involved in something unspeakable, something dangerous. It is said she has connections to the underworld. Khalid's heart skipped a beat. The underworld? His voice was sharp, his gaze narrowing. This was not what he had expected to hear. Explain yourself. Imran leaned forward, lowering his voice. There are those who say that Zara is not who she claims to be, that her family's wealth comes from illicit dealings. Some say she was once a part of a criminal syndicate, a leader even. There are whispers that her marriage to you is not about alliances, but about securing a place of safety, a way to bury the past. Khalid's mind raced as Imran's words sank in. Zara, his new wife, had ties to the very underworld Khalid had spent years trying to avoid. The idea of her being involved in crime, in something so dark, sent a shiver down his spine. He had married her to secure his future, but now it seemed that she might be the very thing threatening to destroy it. "Are these rumors true?" Khalid asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I cannot say for certain," Imran replied cautiously, "but the rumors have persisted for years. Some even say she had a lover who was involved in violent crime, someone powerful, a man with a reputation. That man, he disappeared not long before Zara came to you." The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but they made no sense. If Zara had been involved with such dangerous people, why had she kept it a secret? Why had she married him, of all people? Was she using him to protect herself from something, or was there a more sinister reason? Khalid's mind buzzed with questions, but the most important one was simple. How had he not seen this coming? Later that evening, Khalid decided to confront Zara. He could no longer live with the uncertainty, with the gnawing suspicion that she was hiding something from him. His decision was final. He would confront her, and whatever secrets she had buried, he would uncover them. He found her in the library, her back to him as she carefully flipped through the pages of an ancient book. The sight of her, so engrossed in her reading, only deepened the mystery. Zara, who had spent the last several days avoiding him, was now here, in this quiet space, as though waiting for something to happen. "Zara," Khalid's voice rang out, breaking the silence. She stiffened but did not turn to face him immediately. "Why are you hiding from me?" Khalid asked, his voice low but firm. "I know about your past, Zara. The rumors, the stories. You cannot hide from me anymore." Zara slowly closed the book, setting it down on the table before her. Her face remained impassive, but Khalid could see the flicker of something in her eyes. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. "Who told you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Imran," he replied, his words like steel. "The rumors, the whispers about your past. I need the truth, Zara. Now." She stood up slowly, her movements measured, as though she had prepared for this moment. "You wouldn't understand," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I don't care about understanding," Khalid snapped. "I care about the truth. I care about knowing what I've gotten myself into. If you think I'm going to just stand by and let this play out, you're wrong. Whatever you're hiding, it's tearing us apart." Zara looked up at him, her expression a mask of composure. But Khalid could see the vulnerability beneath it, the cracks that had begun to show. "It's not just about me," Zara finally said, her voice cold yet resigned. "It's about him." "Who?" Khalid asked, his impatience growing. "My past," she replied. "The man I was once involved with. His name was Raed, and he was the leader of the very syndicate you've heard about. When he disappeared, I had no choice but to escape. My family—" She faltered for a moment, her eyes glistening with emotion. "My family was in danger, and now I am too." Khalid stood motionless, the weight of her words settling heavily on his chest. Zara had been a part of something dangerous, something he had never wanted to be involved in. But the deeper question lingered in his mind. What had driven her to marry him? To come to him for protection? "Why me?" he asked quietly. "Why marry me?" Zara's gaze softened just for a moment before she looked away, her voice barely audible. "Because you were my way out." The room was silent, and for a long moment, Khalid did nothing. His mind was still racing, struggling to comprehend the weight of Zara's confession. She had been a part of a criminal syndicate, involved with a dangerous man, and her entire life had been shaped by lies, manipulation, and survival. And yet, despite the chaos of her past, Khalid couldn't deny that there was something in Zara that called to him, something he couldn't walk away from. "Zara?" Khalid's voice was raw, his usual composure slipping as his emotions tangled with confusion, anger, and an unexpected sympathy. "You should have told me. You should have trusted me with this." Zara's shoulders slumped as she turned away, wrapping her arms around herself as if to shield herself from his words. I couldn't. You have everything to lose, Khalid. I was nothing but a liability, and I didn't want to drag you down with me. He moved toward her, each step echoing in the stillness of the room. I'm not some fool who can be easily dragged down, he said, his voice firm now. And you're not just a liability, Zara. You're my wife. And no matter what you think, we're in this together. But you need to understand something. We have to face the truth. And we have to do it now. Zara turned to face him, her eyes filled with tears, though she refused to let them fall. What do you want me to do, Khalid? The past is not something I can just erase. There are people out there who will never let me go, who will never let us go. My family's debts, the things I did, it's all too much. Khalid reached for her hands, taking them gently in his own, his thumb brushing over her trembling skin. It's not too much if we face it together. We'll find a way to deal with your past, Zara. I don't care about your family's debts or the things you've done. I care about you. But we have to stop running. We have to confront whatever's waiting for us. Zara met his gaze, her eyes searching his face as if trying to decipher the sincerity in his words. For a long time, it seemed like she wouldn't respond. But then, with a soft sigh, she nodded. I don't know how this will end, Khalid, but I'm willing to fight for it. For us. And so, together, they made a plan. They would confront the dangerous forces from Zara's past. They would expose the syndicate's secrets, remove the men who sought to control them, and reclaim their future. Khalid, for all his wealth and power, had never faced anything like this. But he was not going to back down. Not now. Not when Zara's future, and their future, was at stake. The next few days were a blur of meetings with Khalid's closest allies, strategic planning, and dealing with the fallout from Zara's past. Her former associates, the ones who had once held her in their grip, were closing in. And yet, as Khalid and Zara prepared for the storm that was coming, there was a newfound unity between them. The walls that had separated them, built on mistrust and uncertainty, were slowly beginning to crumble. They were no longer strangers bound by an arranged marriage, but partners fighting side by side for their future. The final confrontation came sooner than they had expected. In a cold, dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of the city, Khalid and Zara faced the men who had once controlled her. Raid's old associates, ruthless and dangerous, had gathered to take back what they believed was theirs. But they had underestimated the bond that had formed between Khalid and Zara, a bond stronger than any past they could ever hope to reclaim. The battle was fierce, with alliances tested and power dynamics shifting in an instant. But in the end, it was Zara's strength and resilience that won the day. She faced the men who had once owned her with a resolve Khalid had never seen before. The woman he had married, the woman who had once been so distant, so afraid, was now a force to be reckoned with. And Khalid stood by her, watching in awe as she took control of her own destiny. When the dust finally settled, the syndicate was dismantled, and Zara was free from the past that had haunted her for so long. But even more than that, she and Khalid had built something stronger, a partnership based on trust, respect, and shared purpose. As they stood together on the balcony of the palace, the city stretched out before them, its lights twinkling in the distance. It felt like a new beginning. There were still challenges ahead, of course. No victory was ever complete without a cost. But for the first time, Khalid felt certain of one thing. Whatever the future held, he and Zara would face it together. We did it, Zara said softly, her voice a mix of exhaustion and relief. Khalid smiled, turning to her with a look of quiet admiration. We did. And I'm never letting go. For the first time since their marriage, Zara's lips curved into a genuine smile. It wasn't the cold, distant smile she had worn at their wedding. It was something real, something born of the struggle they had overcome together. I never thought I'd be here with you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Khalid reached for her hand, pulling her closer. Neither did I, but I'm glad we are. And with that, they stood together, the weight of their past finally behind them, and the future ahead. A future they would face side by side, no matter what it brought.